Hello there, people of the internet. I play with a lot of old school military surplus rifles, and I also shoot a lot of old school military surplus ammunition. And sometimes, whenever I get batches of ammo, they are not of the greatest of conditions. As a matter of fact, while I'm thinking about it, I got this metal canister right here, just right in front of me. And inside of this, I have a bunch of 8mm Mauser. This stuff is Ethiopian 8mm Mauser. And the bullets are good, the powder is good, but the primers are not great. A lot of people with this sort of ammunition, they think that the powder has degraded because it goes click, bang. Way more often than not, that is a primer issue. If you take that powder and you load it into a new cartridge with a new primer, then it's going to, most of the time, fire just fine. And that is a concept that I want to talk about, recycling gunpowder. I don't know why so many people are against the recycling of gunpowder from old school military surplus ammo. I get that it can be a little nerve-wracking because sometimes you don't necessarily know what it is that you're dealing with, but just the most minute amount of research should tell you what it is that you're looking at. First thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to smell it. If it smells like acetone, that means the gunpowder is beginning to break down, and you're probably going to see some different pressures with that particular gunpowder. And if your gunpowder is breaking down like that, then that might be some stuff to discard. But there's a lot of military surplus ammo out there that you can get where the gunpowder is not breaking down and it's actually quite still good. Like, for example, Ethiopian 8mm Mauser, primers are bad, gunpowder's fine. Egyptian 8mm Mauser, primers are bad, gunpowder's fine. So I tend to break those down whenever I manage to find it and I just use the components. Even stuff like this right here, this is Turkish ammunition. And there are batches where the powder is bad in these, but there's also batches where the powder is actually quite decent in these. The issue is a lot of this Turkish ammo has issues with, oh, I just bumped my camera stand. I'm sorry, guys. A lot of this Turkish ammo again has issues with the primers to where it goes click, bang, and that just leads itself to not being very accurate with shooting and not a very fun experience. Nobody likes knowing if their rifle's actually going to go off. So whenever I get myself a bad batch of Turkish ammo, I'll end up pulling the bullets and pouring the powder, and I'll smell it, I'll inspect it, I'll see how good it still is. Some Turkish powder is actually quite broken down and quite not good. You can even like shine a light on it. If you start seeing it like to the point of turning brown, then that means that it's breaking down quite a bit, especially if you start smelling that acetone smell that comes from it. But if it all appears good, then I'll go ahead and I'll take that and I'll actually pour it into, where did I put it? Into a jar like this right here. This right here is Turkish gunpowder that I've pulled from 8mm Mauser. It's just a flake powder. There's nothing real special about it. But what I do with that is I load other cartridges with it. That particular gunpowder, I know for a fact, just because of everything that I've pulled from all of these different bullets, on average, that stuff right there in Turkish 8mm Mauser with a 150 grain bullet, it's about 47 grains on average. Some cartridges are a little more, some cartridges are a little less. So 47 grains on average. Typically, if I'll load it into another 8mm Mauser cartridge, I'll probably load about 45 grains, you know, undercharge it just a little bit, just because Turkish ammo is already loaded hot. So that other round that I'll use, I'll recycle that gunpowder with essentially that same charge, a little bit of an undercharge just to help with, you know, recoil and keep my brass from it just extends the life of the brass just because there's less pressure, and well, frankly, I'm just shooting at garbage down at the gun range, so it doesn't really matter. But that measurement is already there because that is the amount of gunpowder that came out of, say, that 8mm Mauser round, and that is a really, really easy way to be able to tell how much gunpowder of your recycled gunpowder to put back into a new cartridge. You just use that same amount or undercharge it by a few grains just to help reduce recoil and extend the life of the brass it is that you're using. However, what if you wanted to load that into something different? And this is where the idea of recycling gunpowder starts to scare people, because they're like, oh no, that's not 8mm Mauser. I don't know how much of this to put in that. Well, guess what? The internet is a thing. You can go ahead and look up whatever kind of ammunition it is that you have, whatever kind of surplus it is that you have. And odds are somewhere on the internet somebody has tested it, just with the decades that people have been playing around with this stuff. And you'll be able to find the burn rate of that particular gunpowder. Like, for example, Turkish flake powder, like what I have here from this 8mm Mauser stuff. This stuff right here, when it's in good condition, burns extraordinarily similar to 3031. The burn rate is damn near identical if you see the tests that were done on this particular powder. And you can do the same thing with like Yugoslavian ammo or Romanian ammo or Czechoslovakian ammo, Russian ammo, or you know, whatever it is that you're looking for. You can look up the brand, the country, the time period, the type of ammunition used, and odds are you'll be able to find information on that particular type of gunpowder. So now that I know the burn rate that is extraordinarily similar to what I've gotten from this Turkish powder, and I know that my Turkish powder is good because I've inspected it, now I can recycle that powder in other things. Like, for example, if I grab my good old-fashioned Hornady cartridge reloading handbook, and I say I want to reload some 7.62 Russian, some 7.62 by 54R, I can look in this handbook here, and it tells me pretty much everything that I need to know about this particular cartridge. Like for example, I'm actually experimenting with some 123 grain bullets in 7.62 by 54R cases. If I look in my little book right here, I can see that if I have 3031, which is extraordinarily similar to this Turkish powder that I'm using, I can load, with that 123 grain bullet, I can load 40 grains inside of that thing to get 2,500 feet per second. That's a little bit faster than that AK round, and that's probably where I would stick this, just because it is older powder, but 2,500 feet per second with a 123 grain bullet, that's still a pretty good cooking bullet. If I felt comfortable after testing it at that lower end charge, I can bump it up a little more, and a little more, and a little more. It looks like with this particular charge, if I were to load it with 48 grains of powder, I would get about 3,000 feet per second. I would not load it to that level, just because, like I said, this is older powder. The burn rates probably aren't absolutely identical, but with an undercharged amount, like what I have right here with 25, 26, maybe even 2,700 feet per second, I don't think that would cause any real significant issues, because that is well within the threshold of what the rifle would be able to handle. But I know the burn rate of the powder now, very, very similar to 3031. I know the amounts that I need and the velocities that I'm going to be expecting. If I were to take this powder, load it up to, say, whatever it is that I have here with my 123 grain bullet, and chronograph it, and I see the same velocities that this book is telling me that I'm going to be seeing, then I know that the burn rate is damn near identical, and as a result of that, assuming that I'm not seeing any signs of pressure coming from that particular cartridge, that's where I can start experimenting with higher and higher amounts of this particular powder inside of this particular cartridge. And this right here pretty much plays a part with every other cartridge out there. If you want to load this into 308, find a 3031 loading for 308, or 30-06, just find the 3031 loading for 30-06, and etc., so on and so forth. Now, just because the Turkish powder is a similar burn rate to that 3130, that doesn't mean that other powders are. Like, for example, if I pulled a bunch of that Ethiopian 8mm Mauser, that stuff right there might have a different burn rate than that Turkish stuff, so you gotta look up and see what people have experimented with and what information has been found out about that particular ammunition. If you find yourself in a situation where the particular ammunition that you have has not been tested and you cannot figure out what the burn rate is for your particular ammo, then my recommendation would be only loading gallery loads. Like loading them so wildly undercharged, not to the point of causing squib load issues, but to the point to where you're not dealing with, well, there's certain things that go into undercharging a cartridge, but if you use a relatively smaller cartridge, a relatively smaller size just a relatively smaller size cartridge, then you don't necessarily run into a lot of the same issues that you do depending on ratios and whatnot. There's a lot that goes into gallery loading with a slow burning rifle powder, but it certainly is possible. Like, for example, 308. 308 is one of my go-to cartridges for gallery loads with lightweight burning, or light burning, slow burning, that's the word I'm looking for, slow burning rifle powder, just because it is a smaller cartridge, and you can afford in that smaller cartridge to lower your amounts of gunpowder before you start to see any real significant issues. One of the issues with lowering your amounts of gunpowder is if your gunpowder lowers to the point to where your primer is over that gunpowder versus behind that gunpowder like it's supposed to be, then once that primer goes off, it's going to ignite all of your gunpowder at once inside of your cartridge versus just igniting the back of the gunpowder, and the gunpowder burns, you know, from back to front as it propels that bullet, you know, through the barrel, and that's where you get your nice slow pressure spike from, because it's not burning all at once like it would if the powder was too low. And there is a real issue. I have seen that cause problems before. But with a 308, you can get some pretty gosh darn light loads and something like that without running into any problems like that. As a matter of fact, if I have myself a slow burning rifle powder that I pull from, I don't know, some known slow burning powder, like for example old school military surplus 30-06 or 8mm Mauser or something along those lines, and you can weigh it out and kind of get a guesstimation for what kind of powder it is that you're using, and for the most part most of those are going to be a slow burning powder. I'll take that and I'll load it into 308 at a significant undercharge. I'll probably load it with like 30, maybe 35 grains depending on what it is that I'm using, and that would give me a similar load to a 30-30. Definitely not 308 power the way that it's supposed to be, but that's a good way to be pretty gosh darn certain that you're not going to overpress your gun, although you're not going to see nearly the performance from your ammunition that you otherwise should. So if you don't know about the powder, you can play around with it. You just got to make sure that you're doing it safely. I wouldn't undercharge a 308 any further than a 30-30 load, but I've been doing that for a whole lot of years, and that has always worked out for me. I don't know if that's going to work out for everybody, and I only use slow burning rifle powder. Realistically, I feel like that would make a fun video to go out and test different kinds of rifle powder in that 308. Okay, cool. I'll add that to my list of ideas. But bottom line, there's certain ways that you can go about recycling your gunpowder, and there's ways to do it smart, and there's ways to do it safe. And if you know the burn rate, or at least a similar burn rate to whatever powder it is that you decide to use, and you know that the gunpowder is going to be halfway decent because you've inspected it and you know what to look for, make sure there's no crystallizations or changes of colors or weird funky smells coming from it, just to make sure that there's no breaking down of that particular gunpowder, then you should be able to load your cartridges pretty gosh darn safely if you know the burn rate and what other powders it's similar to, so you should be able to recycle that gunpowder pretty gosh darn easy. If you are wholeheartedly concerned and you cannot find that particular powder, then maybe just, if you pull it from a 30-06, load that same amount back into another 30-06. But if you pull, say, old 30-06 powder and it's an old flake powder or an old stick powder, odds are it's going to be a pretty gosh darn slow burning powder, and you should be able to look up and figure out a good similar burn rate for what that powder is going to be. But if you're just not certain, then load it into a gallery load, like a ridiculously underpowered, undercharged version of that particular cartridge, and you should be okay. Just make sure that you don't underload it too much to the point of causing pressure spikes or squib loads. And a lot of that right there just comes from experience and time and experimentation with what works and what doesn't work. So thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below is a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I will see you on the next episode.
since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.